Let's begin. That's the very first detail the story gives us. It's the evening of that first Sunday. In a room, somewhere in Jerusalem, the disciples are all gathered together, and the door was locked. You have to understand, this wasn't just a simple lock on a door. It was so much more than that. It was the physical symbol of the fear that had taken root deep inside the people in that room. And this was a very specific kind of hiding, wasn't it? Their leader, the man they had followed for 3 years, had just been publicly crucified. They had no idea if that close association made them the next target. The city was still buzzing, the authorities were still in power, and they were absolutely terrified. Think about the state of them. The crucifixion had just shattered something inside of them, something that the news of an empty tomb hadn't even begun to repair. They were confused. They'd even dismissed the women's story as nonsense. Peter, he was carrying the crushing weight of his own denial. And Thomas? Well, Thomas wasn't even there. He was lost somewhere out in the city, wrestling with his own private grief. This was a room of broken men. So, in a room defined by a lock, something was about to change everything. You can almost feel it, can't you? The city outside is finally quieting down for the night, and inside, 10 men are sitting with a question so enormous, none of them even have the words for it. The air was just thick with it. And then, just like that, without a sound, without the door opening, without any warning at all, he was just there, standing in the middle of the room, right there among them. He said, "Shalom." It's the most ordinary greeting in the world. But coming from the man they had watched die just 3 days earlier, it was the most extraordinary thing they had ever heard. And the feeling wasn't joy, it was pure terror. Their very first reaction was to think they were seeing a ghost. I mean, it's such a raw human moment of fear, isn't it? It's the kind of detail that gives the story the unmistakable ring of truth. But here's the truth. Jesus understood their fear. He didn't just stand there and tell them to have faith. He met them exactly where they were, right in the middle of their terror and their disbelief. And so he began this process, this careful, patient path from terror to actual belief. First, he showed them his wounds, the marks of the nails, the gash from the spear, carried into his resurrected body. Then he did something so profoundly real. He asked for food, and he ate a piece of broiled fish right in front of them. You see, ghosts don't eat. And finally, he opened their minds to the scriptures, showing them this wasn't some tragic accident. It was a fulfillment of a plan centuries in the making. This changes everything. The Gospel of Luke captures this one psychologically perfect moment. It says they saw him, they saw the wounds, but they still disbelieved for joy. The hope was just so overwhelming, their minds couldn't quite accept that it was real. And then he breathed on them. It's an echo of the creation story in Genesis, where God breathed life into the very first man. This was an act of new creation. He wasn't just giving them back a memory, he was giving them a mission. They weren't just witnesses anymore. They were now agents, being sent into the world. But for one man, the testimony of his friends, well, it just wasn't enough. Stay with me. For 8 long days, Thomas lived inside this impossible story his friends were telling. 8 days of hearing what they had seen, what they had touched, without being able to make that incredible claim his own. His words, they weren't a sign of some cynical disbelief. No, his grief was proportional to his love. His demand for evidence was proportional to the magnitude of the claim. He wasn't asking for something unreasonable. He was simply asking for the very same direct encounter his friends had already received. A week later, Jesus appears again. The doors are locked, and suddenly he is there. And he speaks directly to Thomas. "Put your finger here. Reach out your hand." The text never actually says if Thomas touched him. It only records his response, the highest, most powerful confession in the entire gospel. "My Lord and my God."
Jesus' next words, they weren't just for Thomas. They were spoken across the centuries for every single person who would come after. They were for us.
And in this moment, Jesus honors the faith that comes through testimony, the faith that comes through Scripture, and through the community that carries the story forward. He declares that this way of believing, it's not a deficiency, it is a blessing.
And this is what that encounter produced. I mean, the transformation was absolute. The very same men hiding behind a locked door were just 50 days later proclaiming the resurrection openly in the very same city. Peter, the man who wept over his denial, stood before the same authorities and said, "We must obey God rather than men." A change like that, it demands an explanation.
The story of the locked room, it really is the origin point for all of us. The risen Jesus knew exactly what each person in that room was carrying, their fears, their doubts, their failures. And the door is not an obstacle to him. It never was. May the risen Jesus, who said peace to those frightened disciples in a locked room, say it to you today in whatever room you happen to be in. Just take a moment to reflect on this.